because unfortunately, I think not enough people are thinking about how fertility is a biomarker of health in a female reproductive body, right? Like in a cycling body. And it is something that if we start preserving our fertility, focusing on our fertility, eating for our fertility, nourishing our bodies with our fertility in mind, whether it's current or future, the sooner we do that, the more exponential benefit we're going to have. So for anyone listening to this who's not ready to have kids yet, right? This is actually a beautiful time to start focusing on your fertility. It's never too early.
I am very excited to have our next guest here, Stefanie. And we have so many questions for her on nutrition, fertility, hormones. I sent her this crazy long document because there's just so much we want to know and want to share with our audience. So we're going to get to what we can here. But I first want to share how we were connected because one of our previous guests, Jackie, used Stefanie to support her nutrition through her egg freezing journey. So Stefanie, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here. We have tons of questions, but welcome to Quiet the Clock.
Thank you, Beth. I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, I think just the kind of women you're featuring, the kind of information that we're sharing here is what womankind needs more of. And so I feel so grateful to be part of it.
Yeah. So I always love to start out learning more. I mean, I know about you but sharing more about your work, how you came to your work with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the long of the short of it is I had been a child who really suffered from digestive distress, was in and out of doctor's offices from the time I was, old enough to be like, my stomach really hurts. And I actually only recently found out that the doctors ended up saying to my parents, she's doing it for attention. She's making it up. Like, I have real children who need my help. She's like, because they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And they just kept saying she has IBS and leave us alone.
Oh my God. What was that like? Oh my God. Well, what is it like for you to have learned that information? But I can't imagine, we're both moms now. I can't imagine, going to doctors. And I think this is part of the gap is like you put your trust in doctors and there's some really great ones. And I think there are some that will say things like this to you. What was that? I can't imagine what that was like for your parents.
Totally. I mean, well, I only found this out a couple of years ago. My mom said to me, that's what the doctors were telling us, because I just remember going in and out of the offices and then being like, well, try this medication and it would make me feel worse or wouldn't do anything. And finally, when I was about 13, my aunt had heard of someone, like one of her friends had gone gluten-free, and it like totally changed her life. And I'd been tested for celiac, but at this time I'm 12 years old. My life is like calling my mom from the bathroom stall of a bar and bat mitzvah, being like, come get me. I'm so, miserable.
Yeah.
That I was just ready to do anything. And so I was like, okay, well, let's try it. And then back then there was like this tiny little gluten-free section at Whole Foods, and, all the gluten-free food, like, the pastas and crackers and stuff tasted like cardboard. But I was like, I'll do anything. And I actually happened to be a kid who liked to cook, which was a blessing.
Oh, cool.
And
interesting.
I used to, when I was like homesick from school, I used to watch the Food Network before TiVo and like, take notes in my little thing. So I was really into cooking, fortunately, and that really saved me. But yeah, like after 3 months of going gluten-free, most of the symptoms I'd been having for almost 13 years went away. And so I just became very aware of the relationship between food as medicine or food as a catalyst for dis-ease in my body. And I also realized from a very early age that Western medicine was not going to be the thing that like saved me, nor was it probably what was serving the general population. And so fast forward, I don't know, 5 to 8 years, I went to college and my mom was like, you should be a nutritionist. And I was like, shut up, Mom, you know nothing about me, And I ended up getting a degree in conflict resolution, lived abroad for a long time. And when I came back, really had this returning moment of my mom was right. I probably should do something in health and wellness.
Did you hate that? You're like, damn it. They were right all along.
And really was witnessing the relationship of all of I had this reverse culture shock. Every commercial on TV when I came back to the States was for either junk food or a pharmaceutical, and no one was putting the two together. And so I decided to go back to school and get a degree in holistic nutrition. And while I was in school, I also was realizing I had been on the birth control pill, and I got off and had this whole, oh my God, this is what it's like to be in a cycling body, and had really bad post birth control
Mm.
syndrome, and really became enamored by just how amazing the female body is, and wanted to learn everything I could about this cycle. I'd always wanted to be a mom. And, I had a lot of fears around infertility, actually, because my aunt, who I shared a lot of um, body stuff with, she also had really bad stomach problems, periods,
Oh,
whatever,
really?
had struggled to have both of her kids, and ended up having them through IVF after, a decade of trying. And
Oh, wow.
so I just really became so interested in learning everything I could about this. And over time, my practice naturally just started to attract more women who were interested in the same things. And, the rest is history. Almost a decade later, helped, over 50 women have beautiful
Amazing.
babies, healthy
Amazing.
pregnancies, and hundreds more women feel confident in their fertility, confident in their bodies, and in flow with their hormones.
Yeah. And I imagine through your work or even your learning, just seeing this gap or this disconnect between like what we've been told or how little we've been told about the connection between nutrition and fertility. And I have to say, like, I'm learning so much now after being a mom, after going through egg freezing, we are going through IVF. Like, I'm learning so much through doing this work on the podcast. So it's incredible that you know, have this information, had this journey that made you like really hungry to know more. And what's been so amazing, a lot of the guests that we have on that's doing work like this is born out of their own experience. And it's like everyone trying to pay it forward and just get more information out there. So I would be curious, when are women coming to you? One of the things that caught my ear is like when you were trying to figure out your own health stuff, like, when the gluten-free suggestion came to you, you're like, I'll try anything. And I think that's a lot of, the narrative women might hold if they're having trouble or say they've done a round of egg freezing and they haven't gotten the result that they wanted. I think there is, and I can speak for myself, this desire to like, what else can I do? And I've asked questions to other doctors and they'll just say, just take your prenatal and that's it. And there's no, yeah, yeah. So can you, sort of speak to that in terms of what you see in your work and what you've learned like this, like, why don't we know more sooner?
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's a couple points here that I want to touch on. So the first one is, you said, when are people coming to me? And I love the saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is right now. Right.
Oh, I
And,
love that.
you know, to some extent, I'm so passionate about getting women thinking about their fertility before they want to get pregnant. Because unfortunately, I think not enough people are thinking about how fertility is a biomarker of health in a female reproductive body, right? Like in
Mm,
a cycling body. And it is something that if we start preserving our fertility, focusing on our fertility, eating for our fertility, nourishing our bodies with our fertility in mind, whether it's current or future, the sooner we do that, the more exponential benefit we're going to have. So for anyone
mm.
listening to this who's not ready to have kids yet, right? This is actually a beautiful time to start focusing on your fertility. It's never too early. And that said, the second best time is right now, right? So no matter where you are on that fertility journey, there's so many things that we can do. I always think about, I had a very special client who had done so many rounds of IVF. Her doctor had told her husband at the last appointment they had before they started working with me that they could have bought a private island with the amount of money that they had spent on IVF,
Oh,
and they still didn't have a baby. There was still, she had never even gone for a transfer. They were still on
no.
nutrition
Oh
pills.
my gosh. Wow.
And when I looked at her food journal, I remember thinking, and I think I said to her, no one's ever talked to you about this. And I was a little bit early in my practice in terms of working with people who were already in the IVF journey. And so this was many years ago. And so I remember thinking, well, her doctors must be talking to her about her diet and, things like that. And I looked at her food journal and I was in shock. And I said, no one's ever talked to you about this? Not at all. Her AMH, in the 4 months that we worked together, she took time off from IVF. Her AMH more than quadrupled while we were
Amazing.
working together. Her next retrieval, she was able to go and have, grade A and B embryos, where before she was never even, fertilizing. Like, it was
Wow.
so,
Significant change.
so powerful. Yeah. And I think what's unfortunate, what's beautiful about the fertility world and IVF especially, is that there are doctors, it's kind of like the Wild West. Like, they can kind of go wherever they want with things, and it's like the research is so new and revolutionary, and we're just it's moving at a quicker rate than the rest of
Mm-hmm.
medicine, which I think gives us a lot of opportunity for doctors to be more proactive in the nutrition and supplement side. But generally speaking, if you're the average woman who goes to your OBGYN and is like, yeah, I've been trying to get pregnant for a few months, they just don't have the training. My friends who are coming out of medical school and residency and have been in, school to be a doctor for over 12 years at this point, right?
It's
Have
wild.
have had zero nutrition training, none. And they, will self-admit most of their training is, how do we use pharmaceuticals to cover up,
Oh my
to just
God.
like fix the solution, fix something and like provide a solution. So when we are dealing with natural matters of the body, like how do I eat for my fertility, or how do I eat for hormone balance, or just to have good energy, right? And this is something I see postpartum all the time. Like, how do I eat to replenish my body after having a baby?
Mm.
They don't have the tools to help us. And so fortunately, there are other people and ways to get this knowledge, like, and this
Well, and
podcast
this is like,
a lot
I
of
think
ways.
just the benefit of, I think there's pros and cons to everything and pros and cons to social media, but that's what's so helpful is that there are people like you doing work like you're doing and putting information out there and I think there is this shift of seeking other resources than just medical doctors, and there's acupuncture and there's, nutrition. But I think without access to that, we would just kind of trust our medical doctors. And it's really interesting. I had Marsha Inhorn on, and she wrote a book, Motherhood on Ice, and she did a whole research study on women that froze their eggs. And part of what she included in the book was, and I'm going to not remember the stats correctly, but similar to what you're saying about your friends coming out of medical school and the lack of nutritional training, no, these doctors didn't even feel like it was their responsibility to even bring up egg freezing to women. So they're like
Mm,
giving them really like not a lot of information. So that's,
yeah.
it's hard to hear, but it's helpful to know, like, we do have to seek other resources that are obviously very helpful. The other thing, and I want to, so there's so much to talk about. I love what you said about the being proactive about your fertility, because I know a lot of women, clients, friends, listeners of this podcast are in this pre-contemplation state of trying to think about, do I want to freeze my eggs or not? And that's a very hard decision because it's financially, it's expensive. It's a lot on your body. There's so many emotional narratives around, I can't believe I have to do this. I'm at this age. And so I love what you were saying too. Like, if someone's in that place, there's still things that they can do. And I'd love for you to share, like, I think when you can have some sense of control over something, it's very helpful. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Just maybe we could speak to that. Like, if you're a woman like on the fence about whether or not egg freezing is for you right now, like, what can they be doing to
Yeah,
start preserving fertility through nutrition?
absolutely. And I think this applies to anyone who, no matter what decision they make, whether to do it or not to do it, because before you freeze your eggs, it's also advantageous to make that cycle as as fruitful as possible in all the ways. And so, before anyone, goes on that journey, I highly recommend really taking a couple months to deeply invest in making those eggs of highest quality possible to give you more options later. So, whether it's to preserve it and not freeze your eggs, or to, I think it's really important. So the way that I like to think about it is, you know, we all can look at our population and see how different people age, right? You can
Mhm.
have two women that are 60 and one looks 50 and one looks 75, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference? How they ate, if they, spent a lot of time in the sun, how, if they smoked cigarettes, if they, moisturize, right? Like there are all of these
Habits.
things
Yeah. What are the
that,
habits?
right, that like influence the way that our genes express themselves, the way that we age. And so the reason we tend to see, this is the kind of generally speaking, of course, there are more, there are exceptions to this, and I can speak to those a little bit too, but generally speaking, the reason we see fertility rates decline as women get older is due to oxidative stress, and this influences our eggs. Our eggs age. Okay, we're born with all the follicles that we're going to have, and over time they're exposed to oxidative stress and aging just like the rest of us.
Mm.
Sperm don't really do that. They're like made fresh. And so, which is why, even though actually we do see sperm quality decline as men get older, I think that's likely also due to just other oxidative stress that builds up in the body. But anyways, so one of the most important things we can do is really live in a way that promotes antioxidants in the body, right? So the opposite of oxidation, which is
Mhm.
aging. And we've seen in the research things like resveratrol, right? Which actually can produce the opposite effect.
I just learned
Produce,
about that. Okay. Yes. Wow.
yeah. So resveratrol is like an amazing supplement that you can take. I actually had my husband taking resveratrol and leading up to our conception, because there's also really a lot of evidence that it supports sperm quality as well. So resveratrol is a really great example. Eating foods that are super rich in polyphenols and antioxidants. This again, it just works against the aging process and can actually improve the quality of our eggs. And
Mm.
so if you are thinking, okay, like I don't know if I want to freeze my eggs, but I want to, hopefully conceive in the next several years, what can I do to really support my egg quality? Reducing the sources of inflammation in your life, right? So this could be, potentially from alcohol or other, substances, stress, just like the way that we interact in the world, like
That's a hard
oxidative
one.
stress is also from just stress, really supporting your body with loads of antioxidants, supplementing smartly, and, just taking care. That's specifically for eggs. But if we were thinking also just about like general fertility, taking care of your hormones, right? And making sure that our womb space is a hospitable home when we're ready to
Mm.
conceive.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of questions. So,
Yeah.
can you give some examples of foods that would be considered antioxidants?
Yeah. So deeply pigmented foods. So the way that I like you to think about this is, if you cut open a fruit or vegetable, is it colorful all the way through? So think about an apple. Beautiful red or green on the outside, but you cut it open and it's beige on the inside,
Right.
right? But what about a beet? You cut open a beet and
Ah,
it's just bursting with color. So that's deeply pigmented. Reds, blues, purples, those like deeply colored foods have more antioxidants. The more color, the more antioxidants. So wild blueberries are an amazing source of, those rich polyphenols, which help with egg quality. Leafy greens, liver, which is not necessarily a deeply pigmented food, but is just so abundant in minerals, and it's like a nature's prenatal. It's really amazing. Um,
mm,
and another thing in my fertility framework, I talk about ancestral foods. So looking at what all around the world, different tribal and cultures have as their fertility foods for moms postpartum or when they're pregnant or trying to get
wow,
pregnant,
interesting.
because there's a lot of wisdom there. And so we'll find, oysters, egg yolks, roe, like salmon roe, you know, lots of like rich fatty foods. Avocado is great. We really want, so just like that yummy ancestral diet, those really, oysters are an amazing, I think I might have already said that, but oysters are
I
amazing
never knew
because,
that. Oysters. Wow.
yeah, like go if you need another excuse to go to like oyster happy hour, right? It's They're
For
so
my
rich in
fertility.
so rich in, yeah, and all the trace minerals that we're so deficient in our modern Western diet. So we really look at like these traditional animal protein rich foods paired with these really bright, colorful vegetables and fruits. And the combination of those two really sets us up for a lot of fertility success.
Amazing. I love that. I love those such tangible suggestions. Like that's why I asked specifically those foods because I think they can be very easy to add into your diet.
Yeah, totally. It's just getting in the habit of it, right? If you're someone who never grew up eating liver, it probably sounds super weird to you, right? But go make some pate and like ease your way into it, or mix a little bit of liver into your meatloaf or to your meatballs or your taco mix and just kind of like work it
Oh,
in
that's a
easily.
great idea. Well, I think what I have found too is, and share with me if you've seen this too in your work with your clients, is that when this matters to you, when you do want to think about preserving your fertility through egg freezing, or if you're, further along in the fertility journey and you're thinking about having a baby, like I think you're willing to do
Yeah.
whatever is going to help you and what's going to support you. And I think that's why it's important to have these type of conversations just to arm women with more information. And I know for myself, especially through the egg freezing process, there's still so much uncertainty. And that's why it's a hard decision too, because it's just huge investment financially, emotionally, physically, and you just don't even know what the outcome is going to be. And so if you can kind of attach to something that you can actively do to help yourself, and again, the outcome can still be uncertain, but I think women really want those pieces of advice and those resources of like, okay, so much of this is out of my control, so much of this is uncertain, so
Yeah.
much of this is emotionally heavy, but like I can incorporate these foods, or I can add these supplements. I think that's so hugely helpful in such a daunting process.
Absolutely. I used to always say that, some of the work that I did helped women take control of their health so they could take control of their lives. And I think control has a little bit of a negative connotation, right? And sometimes in taking control of our health, we have to surrender to the things that
Yeah.
we don't have power over. But there is something really amazing about saying, I am the sovereign of my body. I am the one who's making decisions for me. They're educated decisions. And I'm going into whatever this experience is, knowing that I'm doing what is in my power to do to support
Hmm.
it. Right. And then because I've done that, it allows me to surrender to what's left, with what's left that I have zero control over.
Yeah, and I think there's so much reassurance in that idea. Well, I think that helps the surrender to say I did everything that I could do and I made all the choices that I had control over, right? And I think sometimes without that, maybe you get an outcome that's not totally satisfying, and then you beat yourself up. Should I have done this? Should I have done that? So I think yeah, it definitely helps the release of all the other parts that are out of your control.
100%.
Do you find with some of the women that you work with, are you ever surprised by the gap of knowledge? Do you have women that come in and like me, I'm learning all of this stuff
Mhm.
very, very newly through the podcast and even some of my own journey. But maybe you're not surprised anymore by how little people know? Or what is it like when someone comes to you and is like, I had no idea, like my doctor didn't tell me anything about this?
Yeah. I think at this point, I'm desensitized to that a little bit because I've been surprised so many times. I
Mm,
mean, I guess sometimes I am. I mean, I guess I talk about it, confidentially, of course, but like with my partner in a way where I'm just like, and can you believe that her doctors, that this woman's doctor said this? And he's like, yeah, I can because we've done this so many times. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt every time I hear it, right? I mean, I still feel so much pain. Someone that's specifically coming to me in mind right now, I had a client who had really terrible fibroids. And
hmm.
that was her primary struggle with fertility. And, when by the time she had come to me, she had already had surgeries, to remove the fibroids, and they felt like they maybe didn't get all of them. And without getting into too many details, when I started looking at her environment, the thing I don't just work on nutrition. We really do lifestyle, mindset,
Ooh,
spirituality. I mean, because it's
I
not
love it.
enough. to just eat well, right? Like we have to, you could have the perfect diet, but if we're not managing your stress, it's not going to matter. You could have the perfect diet, but if your home is filled with xenoestrogens, it's probably not going to work super well. So when we started looking around at her, she was using really toxic products in her home, on her body, and had
Mm,
zero idea that those are super connected to fibroids. I mean, you can just go online and search fragrance fibroids and find articles that NBC posted or whoever, and it's like, to me, it's so obvious. And I'm maybe paying attention to that kind of stuff in the media when
yeah.
I see it, because I'm like, oh, finally they're talking about it. But it is always surprising to me when people in today's day and age where information is so abundant, if you look for it, are uneducated about how certain things in their lifestyle might be influencing their fertility, for sure.
Yeah, and I've just started to look at more of that stuff too, and it's like you can't unsee it. And then you kind of start looking at everything and all the products and what's in it. And I'm new to all of that stuff too. I love your holistic approach because I agree with that. I think it can't just be one part, and all these
Yeah.
parts of us impact our journey and our capacity to hold space for this journey that can be really hard. How do you work with? I guess how do you work with stress? And I know mindset can help stress, but how do you work with both of those things?
So for stress, I think the beautiful and the challenging thing about it is it's really unique to every person, right? There are, I don't know, 9 billion people on the planet or something, and there are 9 billion ways to relieve stress. For each person, we have to work with what tools are already accessible to them, what
Mm,
makes because again, when I'm working with someone, it's typically stress is not the only thing we're working on, right? There are all these different things, and I never want to create more stress
right.
by having them be like, well, here's my stress management plan, start over, right? So we talk through it. What are some things that when you're having a bad day make you feel better? What are some ways that, when you feel, I'll describe different feelings in their body depending on what's coming up. What would you do to counteract that? And I might give them specific tools depending on what's coming up. A tool that I really love using with clients for acute stress management. One thing I do with every client is we talk about the two avenues that when we're talking about stress, what we need to think about is acute stress management and preventative stress management.
Mm.
And so acute stress management is, I just went to the post office and they've lost, my irreplaceable package and they have no idea where it is. And then my flight that I'm supposed to go on tomorrow just got rescheduled. It's like the days where like everything's going bad and you need to just be like, right? Like I had this super stressful thing happen. My boss said something to me and I feel like I'm so angry. We need to have tools to deal with that in the moment to help your body come back to feeling safe, right?
Yeah.
We have this, it's natural to have a moment of stress, but we need to be able to come back down.
Regulate. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But we also need to have preventative stress management tools. This might be something like a daily meditation practice or, a yoga class that I go to twice a week, or my partner and I sitting down and having our weekly meeting where we just like get everything out in the open, because these preventative stress management tools help us expand our capacity
Mhm.
to deal with the daily stuff. And I find a lot of people are imbalanced with those. Either they're like
Mm.
they have too few, preventative measures and too many acute measures, but then they don't work when the preventative, so we really need to make sure that both of those toolboxes have enough in them so that we can, switch back and forth as needed. But what those tools are is really going to depend on the person, their lifestyle. Do they work from home? Do they work in an office? Right? For people who, I had a client who worked in an office and we called it potty pranayama, when she would like go to the bathroom and do a little bit of breath work,
Oh,
because it was like
great.
the only place at work where she could like have quiet and silence, right? And it was totally appropriate for her to go to the bathroom for 5 minutes, but if she was sitting at her desk doing a breathing exercise, it'd be kind of weird.
Oh, I love
So
that.
it's really just working with an individual. So if you're thinking about this and you're like, I know my stress is something that I really need to work on, I would say sit down and think about what are two things from each of those categories, preventative and acute, that you already find yourself leaning towards, but maybe you're just not utilizing enough. Or it's something that like you tried a long time ago, but you just kind of forgot about, and see how you can start incorporating that back in your life.
Yeah, and I love that preventative that method because that's a lot of the work I do with my clients too. Because sometimes when you are, activated, you can't access those like the tools from the acute
Yeah.
section. So the preventative is, they're both very helpful, but I know when sometimes you're very activated, it's hard to access those. And, I think these things are, there's stressors, work, life, relationships. But when you're also thinking about egg freezing or IVF, it's like everything feels compounded. So to build that skill set, and I always say, you know, have your support team before you go through this, like identify who that is, whether that's egg freezing or thinking about egg freezing, or, your own fertility journey, if you're doing IVF, or just trying to have your team in place. And I think what I love about the way you work is, one is so holistic, but it's person centered. It sounds like you're really tailoring your work to what each individual is bringing. And I think often, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think sometimes if you're going to a fertility clinic or a doctor, it's like you don't often get that like personalized experience. So whoever it is, whether it's someone like you or a friend or whoever, therapist, like finding someone that's really gonna hear you, listen to you, and give you tools that are really aligned with what you
Yeah,
can use and access.
absolutely. And something that came to mind when you were saying that is I've had so many clients who come back from their fertility clinic appointments with, a handout that's like, these are all the supplements you should take. Right. And some of them are really great. Like, yes, I'm so glad that this fertility clinic is looking at this new research and seeing that, these levels of CoQ10 are really supportive or whatever it is. But again, it's like we want to be able to customize that. So not only are you not just throwing like money down the drain, but also that you're getting the results that you want. And, you know, this is a bigger conversation around medicine, insurance companies, et cetera.
Yes.
How do we switch up that system so people can get that attention? But in the meantime, outsourcing for it is really so supportive of, your all the things on the journey. Yeah.
Well, when I went through egg freezing, like I didn't know, this is now 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't know, I only knew one other person that went through it. I don't think the resources have obviously gotten so much better. The option for places to do that have gotten so much better. And it was a very lonely experience
Mm,
for me. And I think it can be for a lot of women. And I love what is happening now in terms of like, these resources that are available, this knowledge that is available. There are people like sharing their own stories, or they're doing work born out of their own experiences, because I think it's so important to have that as you go through this, or have somebody that gets it or knows it, or you can just feel comfortable asking questions. And I think, without that, it's very isolating and it's very lonely. And I have to imagine, some of the women that come to you before coming to you maybe have felt that too.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think infertility in general can feel really lonely, right? Whether or not you've decided to freeze your eggs and go through, different fertility treatments. And I I really think that, as more and more couples are struggling to conceive, now it's 1 in 6 couples is the number has a fertility
Yeah.
issue. And, we can't forget that it's not exclusively on the female end, right? That male infertility is rising at a wild rate. Uh,
Mm.
there's a researcher I really like. Her name is Dr. Shauna Swan, and she's looked at the influence of phthalates.
We
And
just literally, Shelly and I are both shaking our head because we literally just watched that the other night. It was wild. And I know she's done a ton of interviews and things, but
yeah,
one of the documentaries we watched was talking about male infertility, and this doctor in part of like med school brought a sample of her husband's sperm, and there was like nothing there, and they went through all their
yeah.
products. And yeah, we just watched that the other night.
I mean, I'm so grateful for the work she's doing. And by her estimates, that by 2050, which, as old as this makes me feel, is not that far away, in
And
the
time
scheme
flies.
of, yeah, in the scheme of human history, the median at sperm count for men in the West is going to be 0. And the median is like when we take all of the numbers and line them up and what's the one in the middle, not adding them up and dividing it. So it's basically saying that like 1 in 2, more than 1 in 2 men wouldn't have sperm. And, we're really looking at holistically why that is: toxins in our environment, obesity, different things. So I just think that as much as it feels lonely, if we open our eyes, we can see this is actually like a worldwide issue and something we should all be talking about, thinking about, eating for, like supporting a lot. And so for anyone who does feel like it's isolating, speak out, like let's get louder about this, because I do think that we need to in order to support, moving forward
Yeah, it's
population.
really interesting. I have connected with someone over Instagram who did this kind of podcast interviewing, work and talking about a lot about egg freezing, I think about 10 years ago. And I was like talking to her and it didn't get that much traction. And then I was thinking to myself, people weren't ready for that conversation. She said that she would have to like, people would not be reluctant to be interviewed, or people would want it, they'll be interviewed, but anonymously. And it's so important to keep cultivating conversation. But I
Yeah.
just found that so interesting. It's like it caught no traction, and she did a lot of amazing work. But she was like, yeah, people were not ready for this conversation. And
Yeah.
you bring up a really good point in terms of like the male infertility, because we've been talking about that too. We haven't talked about that on here, but I think in the conversations that we have previously had, mostly with women, it does feel like this burden of responsibility falls solely on us, and particularly in the egg freezing space, because we are the ones that have to make those decisions, pay for those processes, like
Yeah.
hold space for it mentally and emotionally. And it does feel like a lot of the burden falls on that us. But based on this information, it's like, well, men should probably be thinking about it too if they want children.
Absolutely. And I mean, I have a pretty firm policy now. Any client I'm working for fertility, especially in my private coaching practice, their husband has to be on board. Their partner needs to be willing to do the work too, because, you know, it takes two to tango in this space. And, what the sperm will become the placenta, which is like responsible for giving nutrients to the baby. And, there's so, when a miscarriage happens, I think so often the mom blames herself. I did something wrong. Was it this? Was it that? And we know that up to 50% of the time, it can be because of sperm quality and, abnormalities that can come from either side of that DNA. And so it's really important to me that all parties are on board. And does that mean they have to do like every single thing that I say? No, but I need them to be receptive and open if I have suggestions for their diet or supplement or the kind of lifestyle that they're doing.
I love that, because not only is it like, both things are impactful and play a part in the outcome and equation, but I think it's just also the woman not feeling like this is only falling on me and I'm the only one doing work, with my nutrition, supplements, diet, lifestyle, stress. Like I love that.
Yeah.
I love that boundary that's the rule.
Yeah, that's the rule.
That's the rule. I just have one other question before we wrapped up, because you mentioned for yourself like birth control earlier. And I think that's been a topic of conversation. Like, should I be on it? Should I not be on it? Is it helpful? Is it not? And, we've had some guests on here that have shared like, they were only on it because their partner wanted them on it. So I'd be curious about, your thoughts on birth control.
Yeah. It's an interesting topic that I have received, and I don't care. Like I have a very one of my mantras is what other people think of me is none of my is not my, it doesn't like it doesn't matter to me. Like what other people's opinion of me doesn't matter. It's none of my business, because I have been like minorly canceled over my thoughts about birth control, and I think they're misunderstood. So I'm just trying to really careful with my words here so that I'm understood properly.
Okay.
I am not anti hormonal birth control. I'm very pro women making informed decisions about medications they're putting in their body. That said, I think almost no one, there has not been a single person that I know except one. I have like one woman that I know who it was the right choice for her and she was fully informed. Everyone else that I've ever talked to has no idea that birth control can have the effect that it could have on
Mm,
them. And I have seen so many times, I'm interviewing someone in my practice. Yeah, I started the birth control pill when I was 15, and at 16 I went on antidepressant and anti-anxiety meds. No one ever talks to them about the correlation. I've had people, it's a carcinogen. It can cause cancer. There's studies that show if you take the oral contraceptive, you are at, I want to say the numbers are a little bit fuzzy for me right now, mom brain, but I want to say it's like 130% increase for developing Crohn's or colitis so if you have a family history of IBD, or if you already are susceptible to, like, so many, people who have IBS just go on the birth control pill, you should not be taking that medication. And so, risk of diabetes, there are so many associated risks with specifically oral contraception, but not exclusively. And I feel not enough people are informed. I
Yeah,
think,
I think, yeah. Yeah,
well,
I think that was so well said, because I think there is so much misinformation, and I think that I'll speak for myself, like certain things have gone in really misinformed or just blind and not well informed. And I think that's the value
yeah.
of what I'm trying to do now, is just, yeah, I think all decisions should be made when well informed, you know, transparency, complete understanding of what you're deciding on. So
And
I love that answer.
one thing I just really want to say about this too is we have no long-term studies on hormonal birth control. And now we have a generation of people who have been on this medication for 10, 15, going on 20 years. And there are no studies that look at this beyond several months, truly. And I think more people need to know that we don't understand the risk. I did a podcast on your preconception checklist.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I talk about in my preconception checklist is making sure that you've been off of hormonal birth control for at least 6 months to a year, if not more, before you want to conceive. Because there's a lot of reasons why we do that. Like, one, it can take your body years to rebalance, even with the natural things that we're bringing in to speed that up. But another reason why I'm so passionate about that now is telling everyone I know, if you've been on hormonal birth control, wait at least 6 months, because there's new studies showing a higher rate of cancer in the children of people who had recently been off of hormonal birth control within 6 months had conceived. And we just don't understand the impact of this medication on all of our systems and the future of our bodies. Yeah.
Oh my God, but no one tells you that. And I want to share this with you because I'm like, oh my God, I got off birth control and was pregnant with my son like weeks later. But
And
no
you're
one
not
tells you
alone.
that. No one tells
Yeah.
you, wait, wow. Yeah. And this is
So,
why this is so important, just to, and everyone still has the right to make their own decisions, but to just know the information is so important.
and
Well,
even knowing that information, now you can make choices for your, child that are informed. Maybe you're more mindful than the average parent about what kind of water your kid is drinking and what kind of snacks they're eating and what, you wash their clothes in, and, all of these things, because you have that additional data.
yeah, I mean, knowledge is power, 100%. And I think that, the more that women can be armed with knowledge, they know they have, they can seek out the right resources, they can make the right choices, they can choose the right supplements, choose. So I think, yeah, it's so important to be informed. And I think what can be hard is without, conversations like these, without work that you're doing, sometimes we just don't know what to be asking or what to be looking for. So it's so helpful to have, spaces where people are talking about this, because, you know, first of all, it's like you go in, you're so stressed and you're so nervous and you're so emotionally vulnerable whether it's egg freezing or IVF. It's like, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I'm not thoughtful about what I'm asking, or I'm just fully trusting, like the doctor's going to tell me
Mhm.
everything I need to know. And because I'm in this vulnerable state, I'm not always thinking clearly. So I think it's helpful in terms of like the knowledge and information, and just seeking out resources where you feel comfortable and you feel heard and you feel seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for anyone who's listening to this, who's like, okay, well, I want to get off my birth control then, but I don't want to I'm not in a partnership where I'm ready to get pregnant or whatever it is. there are so many other ways. And I think that that's just something that there's a lack of education about as well. So definitely, look into fertility awareness method and just how to support your body without oral or, other hormonal contraception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for filling the gaps and putting all this information out there. Before we wrap up, can you just tell everybody where they can find you, because you have so much great knowledge to share?
Thank you for having me, Beth. It's been so meaningful to have this conversation. So yeah, come say what's up. I'd love to get to know you and be in community with you, everyone who's here on this podcast. So the best way to find me is usually Instagram, Stefanie Adler Wellness. I'm sure, I can give my profile to Beth and we can put it in the show notes so you can.
Yes, it'll all be there.
Yeah, sounds good. And I have group programs and private coaching options depending on the person and what you need. And so also just come say hi. I love getting to meet people. One thing that I think is great about the internet is how interconnected we all get to be. And I feel so grateful for my online community. And so, yeah, just come say hi.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you. We appreciate having you here and sharing all your knowledge with us. And let's certainly stay in touch. I think there's more work we could do together.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Beth.
Awesome. Thank you. If you like the episodes that you're hearing and you want to hear more, please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more incredible stories and tools.
When I froze my eggs at 37, I felt alone, I felt unsure, I felt confused and uncertain. And when you're considering such a big decision, feeling those ways do not feel good. So we have created a step-by-step guide to egg freezing so no one else has to feel that way. If you are considering egg freezing, if you're curious about what the process looks like or what you should be thinking about, then this guide is for you. We were really thoughtful in how we put it together. I think it's a great guide. I think it's really comprehensive and covers a lot of the things to be thinking about, to be considering, and maybe some things you didn't even realize you should be thinking about or considering. The goal is to not have anyone feel alone in this journey. So if you're thinking about this decision, sign up through our website, quiettheclock.com, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at quiettheclockpod. This is a very big decision, so I don't want anyone to feel alone in it. So if you're thinking about it, grab this guide, and you can also DM me with any questions. I'm here to support you through this decision and this journey.